The abundance of context in Jeremiah 10, as we just read, are about taking that piece of tree from the forest, chopping it, carving it into an idol to which they dress and adorn and bow down and worship to as an actual little g god, a false god. They don't bring it into their house for decoration. They don't bring it into their home and use it as an attachment to worship Yahweh. They don't mix. There's no mixing in this concept. This is the 100% the idea that they are worshiping other than Yahweh. They're worshiping false gods. They're not worshiping Yahweh. They're not doing this as a decoration for their home for the wintertime. They're doing this. This is the description of idol makers. As it mentions, their makers are put to shame. The goldsmiths, the people that would, actually make it into something after it's been carved into a basic shape. So this is ancient idolatry. Over the years, people have taken this passage and they've interpreted it to mean, oh, this must be Christmas trees. No, they would actually, it says the molten images are a fraud. Why? Because they had to melt down the silver and the gold into plates that would fit over the exterior of the wooden internal core. I mean, this is craftsmanship, as it mentions in the passage that we just read, by a goldsmith, someone that knows how to create a molten image. Like he melts, molten means it's melted. He's melting the gold to wrap it around the figurine that's been carved from the wood so that it becomes an image that they can then shape, shade, dress, paint fake eyes onto, and it becomes a lookalike figurine of a god of some sort, whomever they're attributing this craft or this idol to. The point is, these things didn't retain their leaves. The branches were stripped. The figurine was fashioned, overlaid from the molten image from the metalsmith, overlaid for the integrity, if you will. And the wood's probably strong, but the metal's stronger. So then it's a lasting image. And then they dressed it up and put makeup on it and things. Like this was not in any correlated, relatable, or comparable way to what we view as a modern day Christmas tree, which is a commercialized concept in the modernity. But even through some of its roots, which we'll talk about in future videos, there is 100% no correlation to this passage right here. This is the ancient craftsmanship of idolatry. Exodus 22, verse 20. If anyone sacrifices to any god other than Yahweh alone, he must be set apart for destruction. So they would have to fashion their gods first, so they could then sacrifice to it. It was a very intentional act. You just didn't accidentally sacrifice to a false god. It was a very intentional act. There was a location. The people knew where the temple to Baal was, the statue to Molech. They knew where the lamb and oxen statues for Ra were in Egypt. They knew where the temples of Osiris was in Luxor, Egypt. They know where this place was. They know where the priesthood that accompanied those temples were. They're the ones that received your sacrifices to the false, mute, lifeless idol. So there is a stark distinction between sacrificing to a false god versus Yahweh. There is a difference, 100% in practice. In Jeremiah 7, 16 through 19. As for you, do not pray for these people. Do not offer a plea or petition on their behalf. Do not beg me, for I will not listen to you. Do you not see what they're doing in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem? The sons gather wood, the fathers light the fire. The women knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. That's Isis or Asherah. They pour out drink offerings to other gods to provoke me to anger. But I am the one they're provoking, declares Yahweh. Is it not themselves they spite to their own shame? So these people are in their attitude intentionally worshiping the Queen of Heaven, or the consort of Ra, sometimes referred to as the Eye of Ra in other parts of Egyptology, but also referred to as Inanna or Isis or Hathor, depends on the avatar form. And this is where they're worshiping the Queen of Heaven. That's what she would be referenced as. Okay. This is they're baking cakes for her, and the traditional understanding back in the day was they would bake a cake and then they would put some sort of flame or candle on it to supposedly ward off evil spirits as a part of their ritual worship to this idol. Okay. While they would then also, in addition to the other idols, sacrifice people, as we've been reading. Okay. So we're compiling descriptions of their practices of what they would do. These were the ways of the nations. Jeremiah 7:30-31 goes on to expound, "For the people of Judah have done evil in my sight, declares Yahweh. They've set up their abominations in the house that bears my name, and so have defiled it. They have built the high places of Tophet in the valley of Ben Hinnom, so they could burn their sons and daughters in the fire, something I never commanded, nor did it ever enter my mind." There are abominations that they put in his house were his idols, as well as the Asherah pole, which was a specific concept that represented the wisdom and the law of Ra, or in Canaanite language, it would be El, the Babylonian supreme deity El, whose consort was the female goddess Asherah, the fertility goddess, also represented by a serpent. So they had the statue, and it was a big deal that they would put it next to the king's throne. In this case, they would put it next in the house of Yahweh, probably next to the Ark of the Covenant. They would put these decorated poles, imagine almost like a totem pole, with a basic outline of a female goddess with all types of inscriptions written all over it. But it represented that they trusted in the law of the Canaanite gods, or Ra, the Egyptian god, because it's all the same pantheon, just by different names. So the idea was they would put this up as a representation, as a visual representation, that, and reminder to all the people involved in the court, as well as the king and everybody involved, that they worship the law and the wisdom of Ra, and that law had an actual name. It's called Ma'at, and it's like an entirely documented thing, right? Whereas in Deuteronomy 17, we see that the king of Israel is supposed to write out God's instructions, God's law, and abide by that, right? As the Ark of the Covenant had a copy of the covenant inside the covenant itself. So they would basically do this as an affront, thumbing their nose to Yahweh to put in his house. Oh, by the way, we're not listening to your instructions and your wisdom. We're going to follow Satan's. So it was absolutely defiling his house, the place that bears his authority, his name. And also while sacrificing their sons and daughters to Molech. Ezekiel chapter 20, 30-32. "Therefore, tell the house of Israel that this is what the Lord says. Will you defile yourselves the way your father did, prostituting yourselves with their abominations? When you offer your gifts, sacrificing your sons in the fire, you continue to defile yourself with all your idols to this day. So should I be consulted by you, O house of Israel? As surely as I live, declares Yahweh, I will not be consulted by you. When you say, let us be like the nations, like the peoples of the lands, serving wood and stone, what have you in mind? What you have in mind will never come to pass." So he's reprimanding them for continuing the same ways of the nations that they had supposedly the Canaanites who were dispossessed out of the land by Israel through the leadership of Joshua moved in there. They were supposed to do the ways of Yahweh, but now they're reverting to the ways of the Canaanites, whom were sacrificing their sons and gifts to God and prostitute themselves with their abominations and their idols. And that is an on-the-nose description. It's not just a metaphor of them being spiritually unfaithful to Yahweh. There were literal male and female prostitutes in the idols' temples. It was a part of your worship. So right now, we're talking about these people have intentionally thumbed their nose at Yahweh to worship. Ezekiel's in the same contemporary days of Jeremiah. They can intentionally thumb their nose at Yahweh to put an Asherah pole representing the wisdom of Satan in Yahweh's throne room. Outside of the throne room, they're sacrificing sons and daughters in the fire to Molech. They're also prostituting themselves in the temples and the high places in the groves, which were also pseudo temples they built up to carry on with the sexual improprieties that went along with the actual concepts of prostitution taking place in the idols houses. So you have mass sexual morality, murder, human sacrifice, trusting in a different law, trusting in a different wisdom, knowing that it's from a serpent god and not the creator of heaven and earth, representing all of your actions through a mute statue that has no life in it that you play dress up with. This is a very specific actions. These were the ways of the nations. All right, another indicator of practice here, affirmed in the New Testament, right? We see in Leviticus 17, 10 through 14, that they should not eat meat strangled, or they should not eat blood, and they should not eat food that is polluted by idols. How do you pollute food? By an idol. You strangle it. Strangle it to death. You don't do the proper slitting of the throat that you're supposed to gently drain the blood out of the animal, and then properly quarter the animal for consumption or for burnt offering, the way that Yahweh instructs in Leviticus 1 through 7. Instead, they would do other horrific things with animals and to the animals as they killed the animal for their sacrifice. So the animals that then becomes food that's polluted by the idol. In addition to the things mentioned in Leviticus 18, where Yahweh says, and we're going to go over those briefly in a minute, but Yahweh explains how some of those prostitutes we talked about in those temples would stand before an animal. I know it's horrific. It's called bestiality, but this is what they would do. And therefore, they would do this in the ceremony of the banquet and the food being offered to the idol. A lot of pollution in that room, which is also part of the sexual morality. And of course, they had a ritual of drinking blood, human blood, usually from either the animal or from the person that was sacrificed. It was horrific, guys. Furthermore, another aspect of their worship was when you look to the heavens and see the sun, moon, and stars, all the host of heaven, do not be enticed to bow down and worship what Yahweh your God has apportioned to all the nations under the heaven. This one is interesting. I do have Ra, the sun god, the Egyptian sun god there. This is them making an idol after something in the heavens, right? Which they were just told not to do. And Ra was their head pantheon deity, which the Hebrews considered to be Satan himself. The fallen angel Azazel himself. But the practice was that they would look through astrology and divination. They would look to the stars and try to find signs of the stars. It's believed in ancient times that the stars would move in certain ways, or a comet would appear whenever there was supposed to be a significant change in power. So this is kind of like what scholars talk about. They seem to be gleaning from the texts of how these ancient cuneiform texts in different places, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. After they found the Rosetta Stone and were able to translate all the Egyptian hieroglyphs, that seems to be what they think is being depicted, is that how they did the astrology by looking to the sun, moon, and stars, and then they started attributing their idols that they fashioned, like Ra, to the sun, and also Sirius to one of the stars, to which then they would, not just the sun and the moon, that a moon goddess as well, but they attribute both to the sun, moon, and stars a false idol. And then so they would bow down, not just bowing down to the heaven. The context is they're bowing down and worshiping the idols that represent the sun, moon, and stars. So they would actually bow down and worship the idols that represented the sun, moon, and stars that were supposed to give them divine knowledge and tell them and forecast things and all that stuff. These were the ways of the nations. There's context here. There's context to what's going on. People who want to honor Christ's birth, they're not doing any of this stuff. Now, how interesting, though, is it that Yahweh decides, since he, as he says at the end of this, he's the one who made the stars that all nations under the heaven are appointed to see and look at. And how interesting is it that he assigns a special star in the east for his son, for the Magi to see and know that this amazing king was born. Isn't that interesting? Is he breaking his own rules by assigning a star in the heavens to indicate the birth of his son on the earth? No, he's not fashioning an idol that represents that star. He fashioned a living son who was birthed through Mary, the advent of Christ on the earth. It's a massive category difference, guys. It's a massive category difference. We cannot conflate the ideas of idolatry and all of its practices with the story of Christ coming to the earth and how people wanted to honor that.